1066 AD was the start of the brutal colonisation of England. The invading Norman imperialists would conquer the country, ruthlessly crush any resistance, and subject the English people to unimaginable oppression and cruelty to easily rival anything committed by future colonising armies. Now, 1066 is around 1,000 years ago, and it's not actually as far back as you may think. If you take you, your parent, and grandparent, that's 3 generations. And 1,000 years ago is only around 40 generations. So another 37 generations, and you are back to that period. Now, England had been conquered in the past by the Vikings, and in 1016, King Canute became the King of England. But that resulted in no big change. It was just one king replacing another, as he pretty much kept the Anglo-Saxon government as it was intact. He brought England into his North Sea Empire, which included Denmark, Norway, and part of southern Sweden. Now, England, linguistically, culturally, and genetically, was very similar to Scandinavia. And there was already many Danes living in England. But the main difference was religion, as the English had abandoned Norse mythology some centuries ago and had adopted Christianity, and the Danes had not. But King Canute, by the time he came to the throne in England, was a Christian. So it was a Christian king taking his place on the throne of a Christian nation. Even though the Normans, when they invaded, they were also Christian. That's where the similarities stop. Their conquest of England was an all new ball game, and they would lay waste to England in a way not seen before, in terms of death, destruction of the people, the culture, the language, and traditions. The Normans had invaded England and defeated the then King of England, Harold Godwinson, at the Battle of Hastings. They had already laid waste to the surrounding area when they came ashore, but with the defeat of the English army, they could now really begin their brutal conquest. William had himself crowned king on Christmas Day 1066 to try and cement his legacy. The English, however, were having none of it and continued to put up fierce resistance throughout the country. William then started to build castles. These were symbols of oppression to the local English population. It meant the Normans had a safe base from which to control larger portions of the local area. Now, you can only imagine what it must have been like for the local English population back then. The English did have smaller castles here and there, but nothing to this extent. So imagine you're just a local English peasant farmer, and all of a sudden on the horizon you see this gigantic building being built, which really hits home. You are now a conquered people. And that was the whole purpose of these buildings. They were to, intimidate the population in the surrounding area. Today we look at these buildings and we call them English, but they're nothing of the sort. The Tower of London is seen as a famous English landmark, and it was actually built by the colonisers to oppress the English people. So it just shows you buildings that were seen as a symbol of English oppression over time have now become symbols of English pride. Now, the Anglo-Danish population in Northumbria, northern England, was putting up particularly fierce resistance to the Norman imperialists. So William the Conqueror marched north to personally deal with this. And what happened next is truly a vision of hell on earth. Once William arrived in Northumbria, he carried out what was known as the Harrying of the North. It lasted from February through to December in 1070. Now, I'm going to read you 3 passages that emphasise the brutality of those events. They're all taken from chapter 10 of this brilliant book, 1066, A New History of the Norman Conquest, Peter Rex. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that in order to maintain the state, a prince will often be compelled to work against what is merciful, loyal, humane, upright, and scrupulous. Of no action of William the Bastard is this more true than of the way in which he now pacified Northumbria. Even the Norman chroniclers were scandalised when he and his lieutenants spent almost a year ravishing the north of England, turning almost 1,000 square miles into a wilderness. He is described as succumbing to the vice of cruelty, making no attempt to restrain his men, allowing them to cut down many in vengeance, harry the land, and turn homes to ashes. Crops, herds, chattels, and food of every kind were brought together and burned. So he stripped the area north of the Humber of all means of sustenance. Oderic puts the death toll at 100,000. So I've heard estimates of anything between 100 and 150,000. Now, let's put that into perspective. Back then, the entire country had a population of around 2.5 million. So 100,000 to 150,000 deaths is 4 to 6% of the population. It becomes worse still when we consider Northumbria is just one region of the country, so the population must be much lower. So 100,000, 150,000 in Northumbria could have meant anything in excess of 20% of the population. Now, second passage. Elsewhere, his forces were sent to hunt down every Englishman they could find. In the process, he spread his camps widely, covering a 100-mile area. Nowhere else in the country did he display such cruelty as in the north, and made no effort to restrain his fury. And finally, both the northern warriors and the Danes had withdrawn, and the peasantry had been left unprotected. King William nonetheless had unleashed his men against them, aiming to bring peace to the North Roman style. Make a desert and call it peace. All seed corn was destroyed, houses were burnt down, animals were slaughtered, and crops were uprooted and burnt. It was an act of deliberate cruelty which was never to be forgotten. So that just emphasises what actually took place in those months in 1070. It was also said that bodies were left to decompose and be eaten by worms, and there was nothing they could do about it because there was nobody left to bury them. People were driven to eat cats, dogs, horses, and it was said even human flesh. Now, this was happening to English people 40 generations ago in the area where I am right now. And it was just one episode of many, because at that particular time, William the Conqueror was up and down the country, putting down uprisings with similar brutality wherever they arose. What did this mean for the English people that survived? Well, all the nobility of England, the earls and the aldermen, were dispossessed of their land. It was shared out between William's men as reward for the successful invasion. The colonialists now ruled the country, so all matters of importance in high places in England, matters of law and government, were all now conducted in French. English would not be used for the next 300 years. English was looked down upon as a language of a conquered people, the inferior language of an inferior race. And though only French was used by the Normans in the positions of power, the peasants continued to speak English much as before. William created the Domesday Book, in which he detailed absolutely everything in England. It records who held the land and how it was used. He wanted a thorough record of all his assets within the kingdom. It was said it was so thorough that every last chicken and goat in the land was recorded in that book. Now, England had its traditional ties with Scandinavia severed forever, and it was now brought under the influence of France. Norman castles and cathedrals popped up everywhere. Traditional English, Anglo-Saxon, Danish names like Athelstan and Athelred, they became obsolete, and in their place, names like Richard, William, Henry, and Robert became the popular names of the day, which are still in use now. After much death and destruction, the colonisation of England by the Normans was now truly complete.